Senator Doug Jones, glad to have you here. So you've been a senator, what, about a year and a half now?
Not quite a year and a half, about 15 months.
Are you ready to go back home?
No.
This place is a little different.
I go back home to visit and see what my folks are saying. And that's what I do. This place is a little bit different. A lot different than the Senate I worked in 1979 and 1980. But it's, we can get some things done if people just talk to each other. That's hard to do.
Now, I do have to ask you this. You were U.S. attorney under Bill Clinton.
Mm-hmm.
And this cheating scandal, this college cheating scandal, and it's been blowing up my social media feed. Sure. A lot of African Americans are going, wait a minute, we've seen black folks go to jail trying to get their kids in different schools for quality education. Should these parents go to jail? Well,
I don't know. In federal court, you got these sentencing guidelines. It's all going to depend on how much money's involved. There's a lot of factors. I think some of these folks are going to hit pretty hard. I don't know about the parents. The people, traditionally folks paying a little bit don't always get the same sentence as the receiving end. These coaches, these administrators, they're really getting
$500,000, one person $1.2 million to get to Georgetown.
It's crazy. It's crazy. I think you will see some of them go to prison. You won't see all of them. I think you'll see some of them. But I think the folks on the receiving end certainly are going to go to prison.
Well, and for a lot of people, again, they're angry.
Oh,
because oftentimes I always talk about, even with legacy, people want to be very critical of affirmative action. But when you look, Harvard, almost 30% of all their incoming freshmen are legacy.
Right.
And a lot of those people don't have the grades.
That's exactly right.
Mom and daddy or grandmama and granddaddy went there.
It's ironic. It was just ironic as it could be. I was in a education committee, the HELP committee yesterday, and we had a whole panel there talking about how do we simplify the FAFSA form, the free application for federal student aid, because it's so dang complicated. Mm-hmm. So many people, especially underserved, students of color, people are not making much income. They look at this thing and they can't figure it out, and they just give up, and they leave so much money on the table. And now I'm sitting there getting this alert from the Washington Post that says that these, rich parents are breaking the law by trying to bribe people to get in. The irony was just too great for me, and I made a comment about it. It's, we got to do a better job in this country. It's just amazing that people would actually go to that lengths just to get in when they can go to a lot of great colleges.
Yeah, well, again, that's part of the problem when we talk about pay to play.
You betcha.
Who gets opportunities.
You betcha.
Let's talk about this book, Bending Toward Justice, the Birmingham church bombing that changed the course of civil rights. I've been to that church. I've walked through it. I've walked around it, exactly where the bomb was placed. Yeah, and one of the things that I think people really still don't understand is that we still have not fully, in my estimation, confronted what took place and the terror, the sheer white domestic terrorism that was inflicted upon black people in this country.
No question. No question, has not been full. And that's one of the reasons I wrote this book, is to, from a prosecutor, from a criminal justice perspective, to let people know, one, what all was going on in Birmingham. What was happening? Why was this church targeted for a bomb? It wasn't just random. That church was targeted because it was a place for the mass meetings. It was a place where the kids had been meeting when they went out and got hit with the fire hoses and the dogs in Birmingham. It was clearly a symbol of the movement, so it was clearly targeted. Those kids may have been targeted as well. This was a youth worship service. When I tried the Blanton case, the first one, I think it was the first time that somebody had actually called this, at least from my generation, my perspective, a prosecutor, an act of terrorism. And that's exactly what I said to the jury in opening statement. It was an act of domestic terrorism before we really talked about that.
But America has never wanted to call it this.
No.
Even now, when I say on this show, white domestic terrorist, folks go, no, that was just a guy who killed two people. No. The guy in Kentucky wanted to kill black people, tried to go to a church first, went to a grocery store, and he killed two black people.
Yeah.
That is a domestic terrorist.
Absolutely. Dylan Roof in Charleston, South Carolina. In a religious context, the fellow who killed those people at the synagogue in Pittsburgh, those are domestic terrorists. Any way you cut it. Any way you cut it. Eric Rudolph, when he bombed a women's clinic in Birmingham, killed a police officer, he was a domestic terrorist. There's no question. And I agree with you. People don't like to use that term. That's always left for people overseas, different people coming into this country to do.
If they were an American Muslim,
oh yeah,
they would call them a terrorist.
Oh yeah, no question about it. Yeah,
But it's like if it's a white male, no, we're not going to use.
It's clear.
Timothy McVeigh was a domestic terrorist.
No question. No question. And I'm hoping, one of the things with this book that I keep hoping that it will get out of it is that kind of conversation. I keep telling folks that we have to kind of look back on what happened, in the 50s and 60s in particular. Let's just use those 2 decades, the early 60s, of what happened in Black America and what happened in a city like Birmingham, Alabama, and a city that was called Birmingham. Now, until this bombing, no one had died, but there were dozens of bombings over the course of a decade that terrorized that neighborhood. And it was all done for that reason, to terrorize folks so that they would not take the next step into political and social involvement in their communities.
And then if you actually bring it, if you just go even further back, the terrorism that was inflicted, you had Black people who literally owned land all across the South, who dropped everything, packed up, and left to escape that terror.
Yeah.
They walked away from wealth to say, I can't live in these places anymore.
Absolutely right. No question about it. And it's a conversation we need to be having. I think hopefully this book will help.
When did you say, I have to do this? Was there a point where it was always in your mind, but what was that moment where you said, justice has to be served?
I can tell you exactly. Well, there's 2 questions. It's really broken down into two answers, okay? It's the first question is, when do we have to do this investigation and do it right? The second question is, when do we need to prosecute this case, okay? Because they're not always the same in terms of bringing indictments. The first time was when I was still in my I was going through the process of being nominated as U.S. Attorney. And this case had been reopened for, close to a year before I became U.S. Attorney. And I go out one morning, and my nomination is pending. It's not pending yet, but it's about to be. And I go out and I read where the investigation has been opened. And that's when I come in and I tell my wife. I mean, I was just, I got to tell you, I was shaking. As I talk about in this book some, I cut classes in law school to go watch the first of these trials in 1977. And I had a connection to the McNair family, whose daughter Denise was killed. And so to see this case being reopened in federal court, where I was going to be the U.S. Attorney, was just something that I can't describe the feeling, but I knew that was my case. It was new. I knew it was going to be something that was going to define me. My wife and I talked about it. And I knew at that point that we had to do everything that we could to investigate that case, because there were so many people thought that the FBI and law enforcement let them down, particularly the FBI. They really didn't. They did a phenomenal job in the 60s. But I wanted to make sure that if we couldn't prosecute the case, that I'd done everything possible, that I could look my community in the eye and say, I am sorry, but we just cannot get there as a prosecutor. The second decision was made sometime later, and that was, do we have enough that we feel comfortable we can prove these cases beyond a reasonable doubt? That was just not an aha moment. That was just something that evolved over time, and as it came in, we felt like the evidence was building. We clearly knew that we had the right people. We clearly believed that we had enough evidence. If there was one point, it was really before our tape was found. It was in the grand jury. There was a gentleman named James Lay, who was a civil defense worker, who saw Tommy Blanton and Robert Chambliss 2 weeks before the bombing, 1 o'clock outside the church. He was an elderly gentleman, very soft-spoken, the kind of witness a lawyer just loves, because juries just lean in. And I told the staff afterwards, I said, this guy's going to put us over the top. We got the indictment. Unfortunately, he had a stroke and couldn't testify in person. But those were the 2 big moments, I think.
In the chapter on grand juries, this is what you said. In the summer of 1999, the federal grand jury was in full swing with a stream of old Klansmen limping, shuffling, and grumbling their way into the Hugo L. Black courthouse in Birmingham. So when you read that line, I think about how Israel brought Nazis to justice.
Yep.
And folks said, absolutely, that's righteous. But again, that's people in this country looking at what took place in Germany and Israel, tracking those folks down.
Yep.
I mean, and to this day, not allowing anybody to go free. But you sort of had this other view in America of, well, we're past that.
Oh yeah.
Let folks live. I mean, even now, I'll tell you right now, a lot of my audience, Carolyn Bryant, the fact that she admits to lying about Emmett Till, folks are like,
right.
I don't care if you're 80-something years old, what you said led to him being lynched.
Exactly.
America likes to, let's just move on.
Yeah, and we heard a lot of that. Okay, we heard a lot of the fact that Birmingham and look, let's be candid. When you grow up in Birmingham, you live with these black and white images of fire hoses and dogs, and you don't live that down, and you don't live down the church bombing. So there is I think inherently a lot of people who don't like to look at their past like that because it's really them as well as it is other people.
Because a lot of people, they were still living.
Oh yeah.
I mean, they were still going to church, walking amongst Birmingham.
Yeah. I will tell you this though, when we finally got these cases indicted, we did a lot of jury focused work. We did a lot of work around the community to see what's our jury going to think about these cases. And we did community attitude surveys, extensive. We did questionnaires, we did focus groups. What we found is that overwhelmingly, white and black felt like if we had the evidence, we should go ahead and prosecute. That was really strong for us to know that and understand that. It was across the board, very strong. No one wanted us to proceed with these cases just to prove a point, but if we had the evidence, you got to remember, these were children that died. Nobody wanted children to die. And so I think that helped us as well in terms of the jury attitude.
How did you walk the family through in terms of they may not find them guilty? I mean, how did you walk them through that? Because if that had happened, now you're reliving the pain.
It was a process that we went through. Two things that I think were aided us in that. And it's unfortunate it aided us in it, but time. I think that these folks were very patient. They felt like that the sooner or later justice would be served, but they also were very realistic about how the passage of time affects these cases. They had lived through the 1977 case where they did get a conviction. After that, and Bill Baxley leaves office, they didn't think anybody would ever take it up again. So it was the discussion that we had. It was a discussion I had with ministers, especially the minister of the church at the time, Chris Hamlin, and then later Arthur Price. But it was the kind of situation, I think, where they felt like, you know what, we get that and we understand it, but yet it's worth the shot. If we can get this done, it is absolutely worth it. I had nothing but support from those family members for what we were doing.
Explain the chapter Sucker Punched.
That was Bobby Frank Cherry. We indicted both of these cases. It was Tommy Blanton and Bobby Frank Cherry. We indicted these cases in May of 2000. We indicted them separately, but we immediately filed a motion to try them together. And we were going to go set for trial late April of 2001. Sometime in the couple of 3 months leading up to that, Cherry's lawyers had presented a motion ex parte to the court. They're court-appointed lawyers, so that's not unusual to get experts or whatever. We're not part of that as the prosecution team. Then lo and behold, out of the blue, we get this motion where he moves to dismiss the case because he is not competent to stand trial, which means he can't understand the proceedings, can't participate in his own defense. It's not an insanity defense that he was insane at the time, but just now not competent. They said he'd had a mild heart attack that was causing all this vascular dementia. So that's where it was. And this literally was on the eve of the trial. We were ready to go with both of them. That hit us and we had no choice but to separate the two cases, try Blanton first, and then get Cherry evaluated, which took a period of about 6 months to get that completed. So everything had been geared to a double trial, 2 defendants, 2 cross-examinations going forward. Evidence against each was similar in some respects, but a lot different in other respects. So we just regrouped, went ahead with Blanton, redid our jury questionnaires, and moved on. And I think the fact that we were able to convict Blanton the first time was a big plus for us with everybody. The other thing that's interesting that happened, Roland, going back to the question about the old terrorism and what we heard, between the Blanton conviction and the Cherry case, 9/11 happened. We didn't hear as many people after 9/11 saying, oh, we shouldn't go back and look at these cases. You didn't hear it at all, as a matter of fact. At that point, it was, well, I get it now. No matter how long it takes, we need to track down these terrorists and bring them to justice.
You also, though, had to deal with a book that came out, Carry Me Home. And you write, when I heard in the media about the release of the book, I panicked.
I did. Yeah, Carry Me Home was written by my great friend Diane McWhorter, won the Pulitzer Prize that year. It is about Birmingham and its civil rights history. And the church bombing is obviously a focal point of that. She interviewed a ton of people, did an incredible job, and led up to the bombing, had put a lot of the pieces together, very much like we had. But what I was concerned about, this was a month or so before trial, I was concerned that that book would get so much publicity, people would read that book, that it in fact would infect the jury pool, and that all of a sudden we would not be able to get a fair trial in Birmingham with a fair jury and a change of venue, and we'd end up in Mobile or Huntsville or somewhere else. And so, yeah, I panicked. I called Diane, said, can you hold publication? And now I know why, after dealing with my publishers on this, she said, I can't do that. Fortunately, that book is about yay thick, and nobody could finish it by the time we started that first trial. So it all worked out good.
So a long, thick book helped.
A long, thick book. It was it's a great resource. It's a great book, and it really documents so much of the personalities in Birmingham and what was leading up to the church bombing. Very similar to the way we had put these cases together.
So take me through what goes through the prosecutor's mind as you're waiting for that first jury verdict.
Well, the Blanton case, the closing arguments really took a lot out of you. I mean, it was an emotional case. Now, we had some light moments in there, as you always do in trials, but it was a really emotional case. We started that trial on a day that one of those girls, it was her birthday, Carol Robertson, would have been 51 years old. That's a really dramatic moment in courtroom, having her mom testify about her daughter's death on a day that she'd have been 51 years old. She died when she was 14. And so you go and you're just exhausted, and we just kind of wait. And so at that point, we felt like the jury would be out for some time. The evidence was just, even though we had a tape recording of Blanton, we felt like that they would really go through and spend a lot of time. 2.5 hours later, we get a call, and the judge says, I'm going to let the jury go. Now, they were sequestered. Both of these juries were sequestered. So he asked us to come back, and I got back over there. And by the time I get to the security, my phone rings, and it's my co-counsel, Jeff Wallace. And Jeff says, where are you? You need to get in here. I said, I'm coming. No big deal. I just thought he was gone for the day, and I was just kind of chilled. I knew this. I knew we had done everything that we could. Well, when I get in there, he says, we got a verdict. That's when I panicked. I didn't think a quick verdict would be good for us. I didn't think we would get a not guilty verdict until I was worried at that point. Up until that point, I felt like we were either going to get a guilty verdict, or we might have one or two holdouts who just couldn't do it. And we'd get a hung jury, and we'd have to regroup and try to do it again. But after only a couple of hours, I'm thinking, oh my God, that's just not a good sign. And he laughs. He says he thinks all the blood just drained my feet. And I was as nervous as I could be until the court reporter looked over. Court reporters and bailiffs have a way of knowing what's going on. And she says, it's okay, Doug. And I just relaxed. But I will tell you this. Listening to that jury foreman, it's a black female, probably 50 years old. We had 4 verdicts on each of the girls for murder. And we used 1963 law. So the jury under 1963 law not only gave a verdict of guilty or not guilty, but if it's guilty verdict, they also fixed punishment, which at that point for murder in the first degree was only life in prison. We did not try, the death penalty law at that time was probably unconstitutional. Not that we would have done it anyway, to be honest with you. But she read, we the jury find the defendant Tommy Blanton guilty of murder in the first degree and set punishment life in prison. By the time she got to the 4th verdict, she could barely speak. She was so emotional. Everybody was so emotional with those verdicts. She just basically said, "We, the jury, Blanton guilty, murder in the first, life," and that's about. And everybody was just, it was just such a relief. Cherry, we felt pretty good about. That jury stayed out about 6 hours. Same thing. We didn't feel like that we would get a not guilty verdict. He had made too many admissions, and we felt pretty good all the way going in on that. And once a verdict came in, I felt very good that the verdict was going to be guilty. Again, we worry about the mistrial. There'd been so much publicity about his dementia and other issues. You just don't know how it would affect.
And so, when you had that moment with the family, what did you say to them?
I don't know if we said anything. I think the only thing was from them saying thank you. You know, there is a great picture that a friend of mine took of me leaning down to Mrs. Robertson after like the closing arguments. She was not there in the courtroom, and I just turned her to Chris McNair, you know, who's a great friend, been friends for a long time, and he just smiled, and I just smiled.
When we think about even these cases today, when I think about Myrlie Evers, Myrlie Evers Williams, and Byron Della Beckwith,
Yep.
When I think about that reaction from her outside the courthouse, for so many Black families, they literally are living today with no justice.
Correct.
When I went to Montgomery, and you have all of the pillars there showing
Absolutely.
the lynchings taking place,
Yeah.
and they still say they haven't accounted for all of it.
That's correct.
That is, and again, I think that's also a part that people don't quite understand, that unique history of African Americans still not getting justice for wrongs committed.
Yeah, there's no question about that. We were very fortunate in our cases to have the only two people that we could bring them to justice. But there are so many others out there that you'll never be able to bring. Number one, you're not going to know, just like in so many of the lynchings, I think. But even in the just cold civil rights cases that we know about and you can document, there's you know, the passage of time, people are dead, you know, then that's not just the defendants, it's the witnesses, and they're gone. You know, so one reason that I sponsored the bill on the Civil Rights Cold Case Records Collection Act, so we can hopefully get some of these records in and release them to the public, because I do think there's a certain amount of healing that can be obtained just from looking in the files, looking at the records, putting the pieces of the puzzle together. And by the, you know, and look, I never use the word closure. There's so many people use, oh, this brings closure. We can't let these cases bring closure, because then you forget about them. If they're closed, they're gone.
Right.
They need to be. It brings healing, and that's a great thing, but we can never forget about them. We can't close these cases and put them back on a shelf.
I believe that the reason America will never fully heal is because we never did, as a nation, what South Africa did.
Correct.
That Truth and Reconciliation Commission was so important to have people come and testify the acts that they committed, the things that took place under government.
I agree.
And when you think about multiple states, sure, when the White Citizens Council, when those papers were revealed in Mississippi, that was one thing. But the nation has never had that.
That's correct. And when when the Emmett Till bill was being considered in Congress, I testified along with Myrlie Evers and others about the need for that. And one of the things I referenced was a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, because you're never going to be able to bring them all to justice in a criminal justice court. Just not going to be able to do it in the passage of time. It's another reason, I think, behind the act that we passed this year. Because I tell people all the time, this is important not just for the families of those victims and for the communities, but in a larger sense, it can be very important for the families of those who committed those crimes, that they can finally acknowledge, because it will be public, that they can acknowledge and that they maybe can talk this through with some folks. We've seen it happen. There are people that have come and apologized to John Lewis. You know, there are people, I've had children of some of the Klansmen in Birmingham who were probably not directly involved in this, but at least knew and were their fathers were engaged in that activity. Reach out to a couple of the family members, especially the McNair family, and just sit down and talk. And if we could, if this and my bill can kind of prompt that, I think that'd be a great thing.
So I ask every author this, no matter what the book, and that is, as you were writing this, what was a wow moment? A wow moment for you that caused your eyes to get wide and go, oh my God, I can't believe this. Or maybe not in writing the book, but let's say with the case. As you're going through it, what was a wow moment for you that just blew you away?
Well, two different things. The real wow moment for me in the case, in the investigation, when we found that undercover tape, and I listened to it for the first time, because all these guys had denied, all involved, they denied everything. And now we have a tape recording of Tommy Blanton telling his wife that he was part of the group that was planning that bomb and making that bomb. That is a wow moment for a prosecutor and an investigator. With the book, I think the wow moment for me is a series of wow moments where I get so caught up in the emotion of the cases. Still to this day, the last of these cases was prosecuted in 2002, and I still get emotional talking about it. I got emotional writing about it. I got emotional when I was reading the audiobook. I got a little emotional just a moment ago. That's really important for me, because it's something that you know has affected you deep down. It's just not something you did as a job. I used to like to say we did these cases because I was a prosecutor. I was sworn to do this. It was my job. Obviously, there's a lot more to it than that. And now writing about it and speaking about it and speaking out when I see things happening today are important. So I think it's the emotional roller coaster that you go on dealing with this, because you live it all the time.
Having you do this and now being in the U.S. Senate means that you bring a different perspective to when some of these issues arise.
Yes.
When Thurgood Marshall joined the Supreme Court, he brought this real world view of race and civil rights to the court. As we move forward, we are going to have fewer and fewer folks who can bring real personal knowledge to these type of stories. How do you think do you believe that's going to help us or hurt us, not having those first person accounts and being able for them to weigh in?
You know, that's a great question, and I don't know the answer to that. We're going to have to kind of wait and see. I hope we have enough of those accounts. You know, those accounts can be remembered. I'll tell you one of the things that I am hoping to do in next month. You know, every year, and this has not been finalized yet. We haven't got all this clear, but I'll just tell you what I'm hoping to do. Every year, someone reads George Washington's farewell address on the Senate floor. It's a really powerful address, and it's a message that I think it's important for people to hear. I'm trying to reserve some time and get some of my both Democrat and Republican colleagues to break up and let's spend some time, probably about an hour and 15 or 20 minutes, to read Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham jail. I think things like that to continue to remind people are going to be really important, because I don't think the civil rights movement is taught as well in schools as it should be.
Oh, not even close. Not even close.
Not even close. And if we can continue to have those dialogues, I think it's going to be a challenge for America to continue to have those voices when people like John Lewis and Andrew Young and Joseph Lauer and those folks are gone. I think it's going to be hard, because I have found that unless you lived it, unless you were there, you don't have the same feeling. I'll tell you an interesting example of that. When we were doing our jury focus groups in the Blanton case, the very first one, we watched such an interesting dynamic between the older African Americans on that panel and the younger ones. And the younger folks only knew the high level of what Dr. King stood for and who he was. And there was one young lady who legitimately thought that black folks had bombed the church because she didn't think, she'd always heard that white people couldn't get close to it. And that she didn't fully appreciate the Jim Crow law and the segregation that existed. And to watch the dynamic with a couple of those older black ladies with her, taking her to school, and her one or two of her friends was really something to watch. So we really had to make sure that when we presented these cases, we made sure we educated everybody about what was going on. But I think it's a challenge. I think it's going to be a real challenge.
And see, for me, I think that's also what bothers me every year with Selma. I was there for Selma 50. And what bothered me was this idea that it was a field trip.
Yeah.
That you had these people who were coming down and, okay, sure, we were commemorating this event and folks talking about, what it meant. But you had many of those Republicans who will come back to D.C. and will vote against the very things they were marching for.
There's no question.
When I was in Selma this year, and I understand, about 100 members came through and, many of them, they have great admiration for Congressman John Lewis. And I said, because we were actually at the community college there in the Hank Sanders technology building. And I said, they should be at these workshops.
Yeah.
I said, not just taking pictures, not just what I said, but listening to the very people who are still here and the very issues that they were talking about in 1964 and 65, Selma is still dealing with today.
You betcha. And it's particularly true of voting rights acts. Voting rights. They're particularly true of voting rights. I've been criticized a fair amount by some folks back in Alabama because on one of the talk shows recently, I talked about the fact that I believe the Republican state legislators and governors and all are making a conscious effort to deny people the right to vote.
Absolutely.
Access to the ballot box. And I'm getting some comments back. Are you calling me a racist? And I said, no, I'm really not calling you a racist. But what I am saying is, for political reasons these days, more than just the racial animus that existed at the time, the effect is the same. You are still denying folks the right to vote.
Well, first of all, when a federal court says in North Carolina there was laser-like precision targeting black voters,
Bingo.
when they have emails where they were asking for when are African Americans voting? Oh, 70% vote in the first week of early voting.
Right.
Cool. We're going to slash early voting. Right. That's real
Bingo.
clear.
You got it. It's very clear. I've told my staff, I said, look, we stand by everything that we've said about that. And what's the challenge? And even when I didn't go to Selma this year because the book came out, and I had an event at the church, but I spoke to the Faith and Politics group the day before, and I made a point in our press to say we need to remember why Bloody Sunday happened. And it was for voting rights, and that when we go back, we need to talk about, everybody talks about the duty to vote. Everybody talks about the right to vote. And I said, we need to give, if we really think that it's everyone's duty to vote as well as their right, we ought to give them the best opportunity to exercise that duty as we possibly can.
But you have HR 1, where Mitch McConnell, absolutely not. We're not going to vote on this.
Power grab, says it was a power grab.
Wait a minute, but I thought you believe in voting.
Yeah. And I've kind of turned that a couple times. I've been asked about that, and I said, no, the power grab is for those who are trying to deny access. They are grabbing hold to the power that they have, trying to hang on to it, clearly.
Well, I think absolutely. I think what we are seeing, because I look at Maine, where a few years ago the voters said we want same-day voting in Maine. The Republican legislature comes along and gets rid of it. The voters go, I'm sorry, who told you to do this?
Right.
It gets put back on the ballot in the next election. 65% of the state passes it. The voters said, okay, we just told you.
Right.
We just told you. But to me, it's also no different than, I think, the Medicaid expansion in Utah.
Yeah.
The voters said, we want this. The legislature came back and said, no.
Yeah,
no.
Purely political. The good thing is that we get at least people talking about Medicaid expansion. They're talking about it in my state for the first time now. We're talking about it. We're talking about 7 years too late. But if we're talking about it, we may make it happen. I've got another bill working on that too. That's my big issue.
Last question I want to ask you about that, because when I go back to 84 and 88, no, I'm going to go back before that. When LBJ launched the war on poverty, he didn't go to the Delta. He didn't go to Alabama.
Right.
He went to Appalachia, West Virginia.
Correct.
When Bobby Kennedy went to the Delta, but he also went to Appalachia.
Yep.
When Reverend Jackson ran for president in 84, 88, he went to Appalachia.
Yep.
He went to Iowa. You have a 2020 election. What should these candidates be saying specifically to poor white people?
That your issues are the same as the issues in the Black Belt of Alabama. You've got pre-existing conditions. You've got health care issues. You've got workforce development issues. You are going to lose your job if you don't have a hospital, because guess what? Nobody's coming to give you a job if that hospital closes down here. And those Medicaid dollars that you're paying for, that you pay, are going to some other state right now. And those Medicaid dollars prop up your health care. We've got to make sure that folks understand, and this is what I've preached so much, that we have so much more in common, but we've used the other issues to divide us, and that's all some people want to talk about. I think we can go into those communities, and that's what I intend to do, and talk about those very issues and say, this is what we need. You need to be focusing on your kitchen table issues.
And I mean, for me, I mean being very deliberate.
Oh, absolutely.
So when Democrats are deliberate in talking to black people, my deal is like, no, be deliberate and say, listen up, white voters.
Yes, absolutely. There's no question. Folks, you got to go into those communities, have the town halls, do the same thing, say the same thing. I think that's the problem that so many people have. They tailor their comments to the audience, and they kind of tend to say what they think that audience wants to hear. But the fact of the matter is that audience knows, that audience in a white rural Alabama knows they got health care issues. They know that they're not making the income that they should be making. They've got a job, but they're not making the income, and that they may make above the poverty, just above the poverty. They don't qualify for Medicaid unless we expand for Medicaid. I think there's an education part of that, in a respectful way, and also a listening part, because I think more of public officials, whether it's in the House or the Senate, need to really, really listen to their constituents, not just the top lines, not just the social media, but just listen to what they're really saying.
I also think, and trust me, I'm paying attention, who is going to be so middle class, without realizing everybody is not in the middle class.
Correct.
Because that drove me crazy in 2016 and then 2012. And also when you have these town halls and these debates, the moderators, that's not their experience.
Yeah.
And so many of them are living in the 1% and not willing to ask those questions,
yeah,
which is why public education never comes up, because their kids go to private school.
You betcha. And the fact is, what could be the middle class has shrunk tremendously. We need to pull people into that, what would be the middle class. I mean, they're not there yet. They're not there now.
The book is called Bending Toward Justice, the Birmingham Church Bombing That Changed the Course of Civil Rights, by, of course, Senator Doug Jones. Senator, we appreciate it. Thanks a bunch.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.